You can't possibly be serious. Pack this up at once. A shrill voice cut through the warm morning air, making me nearly drop the vintage teapot I'd just set out for sale. I looked up from the mismatched table where I'd painstakingly displayed old kitchenware and saw her, the imperious, sharp-eyed Homeowners Association board member who'd declared war on my modest yard sale. She stood there on the curb, arms crossed, eyes blazing, her posture stiff with indignation. We do not allow these junk fests in this neighborhood. If you're thinking that's the worst of it, buckle up. You won't believe how far she goes to sabotage my charity yard sale, nor how a surprising ally, complete with the power of city connections, steps in to turn the tables on her. So stick with me until the end to see exactly how the confrontation unfolds and why this day marks a pivotal turning point for our entire community. They call me Emma Holloway, a 34-year-old freelance event coordinator with an unabashed love for anything secondhand. I've lived in the Riverwood Crest subdivision for almost 5 years, drawn in by its well-kept lawns, friendly sidewalks, and a promise of quiet suburban life near the banks of the Willow River. My house is modest, a single-story ranch with pale blue siding, flower boxes filled with petunias, and a front yard that gets just enough afternoon sun to keep my perennials happy. From the moment I moved in, I knew Riverwood Crest had an active HOA. Some neighbors praised it, insisting it maintained property values and a sense of uniformity. Others grumbled about petty citations and controlling board members. The name that cropped up most often in whispered complaints was Marjorie, though half the neighborhood privately referred to her as our Karen. Officially, she was the HOA vice president, but in practice, she was its loudest voice, always patrolling the streets, notebook in hand, eager to pounce on the smallest perceived infraction. If your grass was an inch too tall or you hung the wrong style of wreath, you'd find a curt note on your door the next morning. For years, I managed to stay on her good side, or at least off her radar. I kept my lawn tidy, followed all the guidelines about paint colors, and even removed a whimsical wind chime because Marjorie claimed it disturbed the peace. When I'd see her on her morning walks, I'd wave politely, then hurry inside. She seemed always ready to scold, and I wasn't interested in conflict. That changed when I decided to host a charity yard sale. I volunteer at Oakwood Women's Shelter on weekends, and we were in dire need of funds for a new transitional housing initiative. The idea struck me one night. Why not gather donations from neighbors, sell them at a yard sale, and donate all proceeds to the shelter? Many families in Riverwood Crest had basements and attics packed with underused stuff. If I gave them a convenient, feel-good reason to declutter, they might wholeheartedly support me. I floated the idea on our community's social media page, and the response was immediate and enthusiastic. Within days, I had neighbors dropping off boxes of gently used clothing, old toys, kitchenware, and decor. It felt like a perfect solution. Neighbors got rid of clutter, the shelter earned extra funds, and we built a sense of local camaraderie in the process. I scheduled the sale for a Saturday in early June, figuring the warm weather and summer break might draw a crowd. However, in my eagerness, I forgot a crucial step: checking whether the HOA had any special rules about yard sales. Why would they? Yard sales seem normal enough. But as it turns out, in Riverwood Crest, nothing is simple under the watchful eye of the board, and especially not under Marjorie's watch. A week before the sale, I received a tersely worded email from the HOA's official address. Ms. Holloway, we have been informed that you plan to conduct an extensive yard sale on June 5th. Please note that per Riverwood Crest HOA guidelines, yard sales are discouraged to preserve neighborhood aesthetics and property values. If you must hold a sale, you need official approval from the board. Failure to comply may result in fines or further action. I stared at my screen in disbelief. Discouraged yard sales? Aesthetics and property values? We're talking about a single Saturday event. Frustration boiled in my gut, but I tried to remain calm. I wrote a polite reply, clarifying that this sale was for a charitable cause, and I'd keep everything tidy. I also requested the official form for board approval. 3 days passed, no response. Meanwhile, neighbors kept dropping off donations, enough to fill my garage and half my living room. I posted updates online about sorting through piles of clothes, labeling them by size, and cleaning old dishware to ensure everything looked presentable. The more I immersed myself in planning, the more excited I felt. People were so generous, and the shelter staff was thrilled. Then, just 2 days before the sale, a letter appeared in my mailbox, this time on official HOA letterhead, signed by Marjorie herself. "We have reviewed your request and determined that large yard sales are incompatible with the architectural and community standards of Riverwood Crest. We request you cease preparations immediately. Noncompliance could subject you to a $200 fine per day, plus potential revocation of other community privileges." Reading it, my heart pounded. Revocation of other privileges? That implied they might block my access to the community pool, tennis courts, or even push for legal steps. It all sounded far too extreme for a one-day yard sale. My hands shook as I imagined telling the shelter that their big fundraising opportunity was off. I couldn't do it. We'd built so much momentum already. I called Marjorie's phone number. It was in the HOA directory. She answered with her signature clipped tone. "Yes, Miss Holloway?" I struggled to keep my voice steady, explaining the charity aspect again, but she cut me off. "Charity or not, Miss Holloway, we have standards. Large yard sales attract outsiders who bring traffic, noise, and lower the overall tone of our community. I won't allow that." Her voice was final, almost triumphant, as though any pushback would be a personal challenge to her authority. Then she added a dismissive, "Good day," and hung up. I stared at the phone, a swirl of outrage and helplessness in my chest. Yes, we had guidelines to keep the neighborhood from looking unkempt. But this was hardly some ongoing rummage fest, just a single-day fundraiser. Moreover, the neighbors themselves were on board. Wasn't the HOA supposed to represent us? After Marjorie's shutdown, I sank onto my couch amid piles of donated children's books, uncertain what to do. Letting her quash the entire sale felt grossly unfair. Yet, I dreaded confrontation, especially with an HOA board that could impose punitive fines. I needed a path forward. Determined not to give up, I posted an update on the community's Facebook page. "Friends, I'm sorry to say I've hit a roadblock with the HOA regarding the charity yard sale. They claim yard sales are disallowed unless specifically approved. I've tried explaining it's a single-day event for Oakwood Women's Shelter, but so far, no luck. If anyone has advice or wants to help me appeal this, please let me know." Within hours, the post exploded with comments. Some neighbors expressed shock or frustration. Others said it was typical of our HOA Karen, who notoriously blocked everything from block parties to children's lemonade stands. People offered to sign a petition or attend a board meeting on my behalf. A few recounted their own run-ins with Marjorie, petty fines for an out-of-season wreath, demands to remove a bird feeder, etc. A user named Tiana, whom I recognized as a longtime resident, posted something that caught my eye. "Don't forget we have a local city council member living in Riverwood Crest, Adam Porter. He's always supportive of local events. Maybe he can weigh in." I blinked. Mr. Porter was a new name to me, but apparently, he'd moved in recently. If he was involved in city-level governance, maybe he'd have insight into how to handle an HOA's overreach. So I shot him a direct message, politely summarizing the situation, and asked if he had any suggestions. To my surprise, he responded quickly. "Emma, thanks for bringing this to my attention. I do believe in supporting charitable causes, and I'm not a fan of draconian HOA policies that stifle community spirit. Let me see what I can do. Maybe I can come by on Saturday and drop off some items to donate." My heart leapt. If an actual city council member supported the sale, it might be enough leverage to keep Marjorie off my back. At the very least, the optics would be bad for her if she tried to shut down a philanthropic event that even local government officials endorsed. Meanwhile, other neighbors planned to write letters to the HOA, urging them to let the sale proceed. A group offered to help me organize the event discreetly, ensuring we followed all cleanliness guidelines and limited signage so it wouldn't become an eyesore. Their solidarity buoyed my spirits. Still, the official stance from the board remained a resounding no. And with the sale just days away, the question loomed. Would Marjorie and the HOA come after me with fines or even legal threats if I proceeded? By Friday, the day before the yard sale, my nerves were raw. I'd spent the evening labeling items with prices, sorting them by category, and stacking them in my garage, ready to carry out onto the driveway, first thing in the morning. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts from neighbors either confirming their attendance or asking if the sale was still on. Each time, I gave the same cautious response. "Yes, I'm still doing it, but I'm worried about the HOA." That night, I hardly slept. A scenario played in my mind. I pictured Marjorie showing up at dawn, brandishing legal documents, or maybe calling the police. Then I'd have to watch, humiliated, as a bulldozer of bureaucracy crushed my charitable efforts. Yet, every time I considered canceling, I thought about the Oakwood Women's Shelter. The staff there worked tirelessly to support women and children fleeing tough situations. They needed every penny we could raise. Could I really let an overzealous HOA scuttle that? My conscience wouldn't let me. At 6 a.m. on Saturday, I rolled out of bed, threw on comfortable jeans and a t-shirt, and started hauling tables onto the driveway. The air was still crisp, dew glistening on lawns. A few early birds walked their dogs, giving me a thumbs up or a smile. I set up racks for clothing, neatly folding shirts and stacking them by size. I placed small houseplants and knickknacks on a separate table, adding bright signs like, "All proceeds go to Oakwood Shelter," and "Thank you for your support." Despite my swirling anxiety, a sense of excitement buzzed in my chest. This was the day I'd see if all the work and defiance would pay off. The first wave of visitors arrived around 7 a.m., neighbors looking for bargains. They applauded my cause and rummaged through the items, chatting about how wonderful it was to see a community fundraiser. Some kids squealed over donated toys, while older folks leafed through vintage cookbooks or potted succulents. The tinkle of conversation and laughter overpowered my lingering fear. But every time a car slowed on the street, my stomach tightened. Would it be her? By 8:30 a.m., I was half expecting Marjorie to swoop in, furious. Sure enough, at 8:45 a.m., I spotted a familiar silhouette striding toward me from the corner of the block, stiff posture, arms crossed. My pulse pounded. The dreaded confrontation was about to begin. Marjorie arrived in her usual uniform, pressed khakis, a pastel blouse, and that signature scowl etched into her finely made-up face. A few shoppers paused, sensing tension. She stopped at the edge of my driveway, scanning the scene with disdain, her lips pinched. "We meet again," she said coolly, in a tone that implied I'd committed a grave offense. "And I see you chose to ignore our official directive." I forced a polite smile, though my inside squirmed. "Good morning. Yes, I decided to go through with the sale. We're raising funds for Oakwood Women's Shelter." She cut me off with a sharp wave of her hand. "We have rules in Riverwood Crest, Miss Holloway, rules that keep this neighborhood from turning into a junk bazaar. You are in blatant violation." My cheeks burned. "It's just one day. Everything will be cleared by tonight. It's a charitable fundraiser. People donated all these items." Marjorie stepped closer, glaring at the tables. "It doesn't matter if it's for charity or for your personal profit." The board explicitly denied permission. She produced a clipboard from under her arm, flipping to a page. Section 7.2. No yard sales, rummage sales, or estate sales shall be conducted without express written approval from the board. That approval was not granted. You are subject to fines, and if this continues, further penalties. I set my jaw. "Marjorie, the entire community is behind this. We're not interfering with traffic. We're keeping the place neat. Why can't you just let it be, for one day?" She sniffed, scanning the small crowd. "You're bringing in strangers to our neighborhood. You risk property values, you create noise, and there's the matter of unsightly clutter." She pointed to my meticulously arranged tables, as if they were heaps of garbage. "I'm advising you to shut this down now. If you refuse, I'll have no choice but to document this as a willful violation." Anger and frustration bubbled up in my chest. But before I could respond, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Turning, I saw Tiana, a neighbor who'd been among the strongest supporters of this sale. "Marjorie," Tiana said, voice calm but resolute. "This event is bringing our community together for a good cause. People want it. You can't just steamroll us." Marjorie's eyes flicked to Tiana. "We'll see about that. I have the authority of the HOA behind me." She paused, then in a measured voice added, "I'll return in an hour. If you haven't dismantled this yard sale, expect an official citation in your mailbox and possible additional enforcement." With that, she whirled around, heels clacking against the pavement, leaving me trembling from the intensity of the confrontation. A hush fell over the onlookers, followed by murmurs of encouragement. "We've got your back," someone said. Another chimed in, "She can't shut us all down." But as Marjorie's figure receded down the street, my anxiety spiked. There was no doubt she'd follow through on her threat. Was I prepared to face fines, maybe hundreds of dollars? The shelters certainly couldn't help me pay them. And if the HOA escalated further? Then a neighbor whispered, "Adam Porter's on his way, you know. He said he might bring some items to donate." I exhaled, remembering the city council member's message. Perhaps that would tip the scales in my favor. Not half an hour later, a silver sedan pulled up at the curb. Out stepped a tall, bespectacled man wearing a casual blazer and carrying a box. He scanned the yard sale crowd, then approached me with a friendly smile. "Emma Holloway, I'm Adam Porter from the city council. I heard about your sale for Oakwood Shelter. Wanted to donate a few things." Relief washed over me. "Hi, Mr. Porter. Thank you so much for coming. You have no idea how timely this is." He set the box down on a table. Inside were gently used electronics, earbuds, phone chargers, a small Bluetooth speaker, even a handheld gaming device. "I did a quick clean out of my closets," he said. "All in decent shape. And please, call me Adam. I'm only Mr. Porter at City Hall." Some neighbors gathered around, curious. News spread quickly that a city council member was on site. Adam noticed my flustered expression. "Everything all right? You look stressed." I explained in hushed tones about Marjorie's threat to shut down the sale, the official letter, and the looming fines. His brow furrowed. That's unfortunate. This is a single-day charitable event. I see no reason for the HOA to stifle it. Yard sales are a pretty standard tradition in many communities, especially for fundraising." He rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "There's no city ordinance banning yard sales. In fact, we encourage community engagement. I might have a word with Ms. Rosen. She's the HOA president, correct?" I nodded. "Yes, but I believe Marjorie effectively calls the shots. She's the vice president, but extremely, shall we say, assertive about her power." Adam grimaced. "I've heard about her. Let's keep going. If she returns, let me try talking to her. This sale is clearly well organized. People are enjoying themselves, and it's for a good cause. From a city council perspective, I see no reason to hamper it." Some neighbors overheard Adam's statement and applauded quietly. His presence gave me renewed hope. Maybe, with a recognized public official supporting us, Marjorie would think twice about shutting us down. Or so I prayed. In the next hour, the yard sale blossomed into a full-blown neighborhood gathering. Folks from a few blocks away arrived, lured by social media posts or word of mouth. Parents pushed strollers, kids raced to the toy section, retirees browsed antique lamps and vintage clothing. We'd set up a small refreshment stand offering lemonade and cookies, donated by a local bakery once they heard the fundraiser's purpose. I was at the cash table, carefully tallying sales in a notepad, when Tiana tapped my arm. "Marjorie's back," she whispered, nodding toward the street. Sure enough, there she was, marching toward us with a familiar scowl. This time, though, her posture was even more rigid, her eyes flicking from neighbor to neighbor. The moment she reached my driveway, she paused, noticing Adam Porter chatting with a group of residents. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. "Good morning, Ms." Adam said, stepping forward politely. She blinked, then recognized him. "Councilman Porter," she muttered, forcing a tight smile. "I wasn't aware you lived here." He extended a hand. "Just moved in last year. Big supporter of community initiatives like this. Thought I'd donate a few items and show my support." Marjorie hesitated, clearly flustered. "I see. Well, Councilman, I'm afraid Ms. Holloway is in violation of our HOA guidelines. Yard sales are not permitted without board approval, and we did not approve this event." Adam pressed his lips together. "I understand your perspective, Ms. Marjorie Heath," she replied, "Vice President of Riverwood Crest HOA. Ms. Heath," he continued, "from what I see, this sale is well maintained. It's a single-day charity event. Surely there's some leeway for community-building activities, especially when they serve a charitable purpose." Marjorie sniffed, turning to me. "Leeway or not, we have rules. You can't just wave them away. We prioritize property values here. Large rummage sales are detrimental. Too much traffic, unsightly displays." Adam nodded. "I respect that HOAs have a mandate for neighborhood upkeep. However, I'm also aware that many HOAs make exceptions for short-term charity events. Have you considered adding such an exception to the bylaws?" She bristled, as though the notion offended her. "It's not my job to rewrite the bylaws on a whim, Councilman. My job is to enforce them. I must insist this yard sale end immediately." A hush fell among the crowd. People stood nearby, their arms full of items or bags, watching this exchange with bated breath. A few shook their heads in disapproval of Marjorie's stance. Adam exhaled. I see. Well, I'm not an HOA official, so I can't override your rules directly. But as a member of the city council, I'd note how positive events like this can be for public relations. People feel connected to their community, charitable causes get support, and it fosters goodwill. Shutting it down might create negative publicity for you in the neighborhood. That's unfortunate, in my view. Marjorie's jaw tightened. We'll risk the publicity. If Ms. Holloway refuses to comply, I'll file an immediate violation. She can argue her case before the board, but the outcome is likely to be a hefty fine, potentially multiple fines. My heart pounded, imagining the cost. Still, I couldn't yield. Adam opened his mouth to respond, but Tiana stepped forward, voice trembling with anger. With all due respect, Ms. Heath, look around. This is bringing neighbors together. All proceeds go to a women's shelter. Are we so cold that we can't let a single day's sale happen? Marjorie glared at Tiana, then took a deep breath as though steadying herself. Emotions aside, rules are rules. I'm documenting this violation. Emma Holloway, consider this your final warning. She rummaged in her bag, extracted a form, and began scribbling on it. I felt my cheeks burn. So this was it, the moment. She was officially fining me. My stomach twisted at the thought of how big the penalty might be. But then Adam gently laid a hand on my shoulder, giving me a nod as if to say, stand firm. Marjorie tore the paper from her pad, handing it to me. This is a notice of violation. You can appeal, but for now, the daily penalty is $200. If you persist tomorrow, it doubles. Effective immediately. Tears threatened in the corners of my eyes. $200, that might swallow a huge chunk of the money I've raised. But Adam quietly murmured, let's see how the rest of the day plays out. Sometimes these things get resolved by the broader community's response. Marjorie pivoted, surveying the yard. I'll be back later. If this is still running, you'll face more consequences. With that, she turned on her heel and left, ignoring the angry stares from neighbors. Though Marjorie departed, she left a heavy weight in her wake. The official violation slip quivered in my hand. Some shoppers whispered about the possibility of leaving, worried about drama. Others insisted we shouldn't bow to intimidation. In a show of solidarity, Tiana and a few neighbors immediately offered to pitch in for any potential fines. One older gentleman, Mr. Lawson, pressed $20 into my hand, urging me to keep the sale going. I teared up at his kindness. Adam Porter offered practical advice. You can appeal this violation to the full HOA board. Typically, they must hold a hearing. If enough neighbors stand by you, they might overturn Marjorie's stance. Also, the city doesn't outlaw yard sales. That gives you a bit of leverage. Encouraged, I decided to see the sale through until day's end. The stream of visitors didn't stop, and in fact, the confrontation seemed to galvanize more neighbors to drop by with donations or buy random trinkets, just to show support. Tiana's teen daughter started texting her friends, who arrived in small groups to rummage. Even a local high school teacher came to browse for materials for her art class. I kept a jar labeled shelter donations, and people slipped in cash on top of their purchases. By mid-afternoon, we'd raised a few $100s, a promising chunk for Oakwood. The sense of community overshadowed the threat of the fine, for a few blissful hours, anyway. But every once in a while, I'd catch someone glancing warily down the street, as if expecting Marjorie's return. The tension lingered like a storm cloud. Even with Adam Porter's presence, the official violation notice felt ominous. Would the HOA board see reason, or would they side with Marjorie? By 4 p.m., the crowd thinned. I collapsed into a lawn chair, exhausted but proud. We'd sold the majority of the donated goods, and Tiana helped me pack the unsold items for potential drop-off at a thrift store. Adam eventually took his leave, promising to stay in touch if I needed any help navigating city or HOA procedures. He even exchanged numbers with me, saying, "Don't hesitate to call. This kind of community spirit is exactly what I stand for." As we wrapped up, a hush of relief mingled with lingering apprehension. The day ended without further sign of Marjorie. Neighbors lingered, congratulating me. We'd earned over $1,000, far beyond my hopes. If only we didn't have that threatened fine hanging over our heads. Little did I know, the next steps would involve more than just a petty dispute. Word of the yard sale and the HOA's attempts to shut it down would travel further than Marjorie ever expected. The next morning, Sunday, I woke to a flurry of social media notifications. A neighbor had posted on a local community forum, describing how our HOA tried to shut down a charity yard sale and threatened heavy fines. Another user posted pictures of me, Tiana, and Adam Porter standing amid the sales tables. Comments poured in from folks across the city, many praising the event and condemning the HOA's stance. Some recognized Adam Porter, asking if the city council would weigh in. Marjorie's name got dragged through the virtual mud, though carefully without direct personal attacks. People expressed disbelief that a single yard sale could destroy property values. Others pointed out that charity events usually bring positive attention, not degrade a neighborhood. By midday, a local news blogger who covered suburban stories picked up the tale. He wrote a short article titled, HOA versus Charity, When Rules Clash with Goodwill, summarizing the conflict. The blog post exploded in popularity, shared across social media. I stared at my phone, both anxious and stunned. This was bigger than I'd anticipated. Meanwhile, I found a letter in my mailbox from the HOA, scheduled for an enforcement hearing next Thursday evening to address my violation. My stomach churned at the official wording. You are hereby notified that you must attend a hearing with the Riverwood Crest HOA board regarding your unauthorized yard sale. Failure to attend or provide satisfactory explanation may result in escalation of fines and penalties. I sighed heavily, folding the letter. My only comfort was that I wasn't alone. Tiana, Adam, and dozens of neighbors had already pledged to stand by me. Perhaps I had a fighting chance. But would it be enough to sway the board? Marjorie had a reputation for twisting bylaws and fearmongering about property values. The Oakwood Women's Shelter staff, upon hearing about the situation, offered moral support. They didn't want me to feel pressured or forced to pay fines with the proceeds. The executive director even said they'd understand if I used some sale earnings to cover any HOA penalties. That generosity warmed me, but I refused to let them shoulder the consequences of an overzealous HOA. If I had to pay, I'd figure it out. But I was determined to challenge the fine on principle. Come Monday, my daily routine was overshadowed by the upcoming HOA hearing. I spent hours reading through the Riverwood Crest bylaws, searching for any clause that might justify a single-day charity sale. No direct mention. But I found a vague statement in Section 2.5 about occasional short-term community events for charitable or nonprofit purposes, subject to board discretion. That could be a lifeline if I could argue that the board's discretion shouldn't be absolute if the majority of residents supported the event. Adam Porter visited me that evening, offering advice. Emma, if you gather enough neighbor testimonies or a petition, the board might reconsider. Also, I'm happy to speak at the hearing, though I'm not certain they'll let me since I'm new to the area. But at least I can provide a viewpoint on the sale's positive impact. Tiana organized a petition on the community's social media page, titled, Support Emma Holloway's Charity Yard Sale, Stop the Unfair Fine. By Tuesday, it had over 50 signatures from Riverwood Crest residents. Another neighbor, Mr. Lawson, insisted he'd attend the hearing to deliver a heartfelt speech about the yard sale's benefits. Even some folks who usually remained neutral about HO matters stepped forward to show solidarity. Amid this groundswell, I still worried. The board had 5 members total, Marjorie among them. The president, Ms. Rosen, was known to be level-headed, but rumor said she often deferred to Marjorie on day-to-day matters. 2 other members rarely spoke up, while the last, Mr. Chan, had a reputation for caring mostly about finances and property values. If Marjorie convinced him that yard sales threatened home equity, my goose might be cooked. That Wednesday, the local blogger wrote a follow-up piece, noting the huge community response and speculating that the HOA might back down. He tried contacting Marjorie for a statement, but she refused to comment. Meanwhile, City Councilman Adam Porter was quoted praising the yard sale's charitable spirit. The story fueled more conversation, some supportive, others cautious. People debated whether HOAs should have the power to ban yard sales altogether. Nerves jittered in my stomach. I dreaded the hearing, yet I yearned to settle things. Would the board see reason, or side with Marjorie's strict reading of the rules? The tension built as Thursday approached. Thursday night arrived damp and overcast. I slipped on a blazer over my blouse, hoping to project confidence. Tiana picked me up, and we drove together to the HOA's office, a small building near the subdivision's entrance. The parking lot was surprisingly full. Residents had shown up in force, many planning to speak or at least watch the proceedings. Inside, a stuffy conference room with fluorescent lights awaited. 5 chairs at the front for the board, plus rows of folding chairs for spectators. We found seats in the second row. Adam Porter joined us shortly after, greeting neighbors with quiet handshakes. A hush fell as the board members filed in. Marjorie avoided eye contact with me. Ms. Rosen, the president, cleared her throat and began. Good evening, everyone. We have an agenda tonight that includes an enforcement hearing regarding Ms. Holloway's yard sale. We ask that those who wish to speak sign in on the sheet by the door. A line quickly formed. Tiana, Adam, Mr. Lawson, and others added their names. I swallowed hard, noticing how many people turned out, maybe 40 or 50. This was far beyond a typical HOA hearing. Ms. Rosen read from a prepared statement. On June 5th, Ms. Holloway conducted a large-scale yard sale without prior approval. The vice president, Ms. Heath, issued a violation notice and fine. We're here to decide whether that violation stands or can be mitigated. Ms. Holloway, please approach and explain your case. My heart pounded as I walked to the lectern at the front. My voice trembled at first, but I steadied it. I recounted the entire story, the sale's purpose for Oakwood Women's Shelter, the short-term nature, the community's enthusiastic response, and the presence of City Councilman Adam Porter. I emphasized that all proceeds went to charity. Then I pointed out the bylaw's mention of occasional short-term community events for charitable or nonprofit purposes. Finally, I read the petition with 50 signatures from residents who supported the sale. Marjorie's expression remained icy. When I finished, Ms. Rosen nodded. Thank you, Ms. Holloway. We'll hear from others. Tiana stepped up next, passionately describing how the yard sale fostered neighborly bonds and gave us a chance to help those in need. Then Mr. Lawson, voice quavering with age, spoke about how he'd never seen such a warm and positive event in the decade he'd lived here. Another neighbor described her gratitude for being able to donate items to a meaningful cause. Finally, Adam approached the lectern. Murmurs passed through the audience, some recognizing him. Good evening, board members, he began. Though I'm new to Riverwood Crest, I serve on the city council for our district. I attended Ms. Holloway's yard sale, and it was exemplary, organized, respectful, and beneficial to a local shelter. I fail to see how it devalues property or disrupts neighborhood harmony. I respectfully request the board reconsider the fine and consider adopting a more flexible policy for community charity events. A few audience members applauded softly, though Ms. Rosen asked for decorum. Marjorie stared daggers at Adam, her knuckles clenched around a pen. Then Ms. Rosen asked if any board members had questions. Mr. Chan inquired about traffic or parking congestion on the sale day. Adam noted that it didn't exceed normal weekend activity. Another board member asked about leftover clutter. Tiana confirmed we cleaned up immediately after. It seemed we had good answers for everything. Finally, Ms. Rosen invited Marjorie to speak. She rose, slow and deliberate. We must enforce rules consistently. If we allow Ms. Holloway's yard sale, what stops others from hosting rummage events every weekend? Our neighborhood could deteriorate into a flea market. It's not about charity or moral high ground. It's about property values. We have statistics that repeated yard sales correlate with visual blight, which can repel potential home buyers. The board must protect all homeowners' investments. Some audience members groaned or rolled their eyes. Marjorie fixed them with a stern glare. Furthermore, Ms. Holloway never sought formal approval. She simply announced the sale. My concern is that we're rewarding her disregard for established processes. A single-day event might be forgivable, but the principle stands. She sat, looking satisfied. Ms. Rosen exhaled, scanning the board. Let's proceed to a vote. Options are: uphold the violation and fine as is, reduce or waive the fine, or overturn the violation entirely. The board will decide by majority. She turned to me and Marjorie. Any final statements? I swallowed. Please consider the community's voice, I said softly. This was about helping those in need, not disrespecting rules. Marjorie said nothing, only tensed her jaw. Ms. Rosen nodded. Board members, cast your votes. One by one, they wrote on small slips, handing them to Ms. Rosen. She tallied, face neutral. The tension in the room was electric. Marjorie watched with hawk-like intensity, apparently confident her stance would prevail. After a moment, Ms. Rosen cleared her throat. We have 2 votes to uphold the violation and fine in full, 1 vote to reduce the fine, and 2 votes to overturn the violation entirely. That's a tie, which means the motion fails to pass with a majority. We must have a second round or find a compromise. Marjorie's face flushed. She shot me a triumphant look, as if expecting a final push would secure victory. But Ms. Rosen continued, let's discuss a potential compromise. Perhaps reduce the fine to a nominal amount and reaffirm that future yard sales require board pre-approval, especially if for charity. Thoughts? The board murmured among themselves. Mr. Chan seemed torn. Another member said he was open to waiving the fine if Ms. Holloway agreed to a new process going forward. Marjorie scowled. That sets a dangerous precedent. People will exploit it. Adam raised his hand from the audience. Ms. Rosen allowed him to speak. Chairwoman Rosen, if the board is divided, might I suggest a trial policy? Permit an annual charity yard sale, limited to 1 or 2 days per year. That way, we keep the spirit of giving alive without turning the neighborhood into a perpetual flea market. Ms. Rosen nodded thoughtfully. That's a constructive idea. Board, shall we consider that? Marjorie nearly sputtered. But the immediate issue is Ms. Holloway's violation. We can't just let her off scot-free. A board member across from her frowned. Isn't Ms. Holloway's cause worth some goodwill? She raised over $1,000 for a shelter. That's positive publicity for Riverwood Crest, not negative. I've seen the coverage online. People commend us, except for this fine fiasco. Marjorie's lips tightened, but the board members seemed swayed. Ms. Rosen announced, let's vote again, with a new motion. Waive Ms. Holloway's fine entirely. Note her sale as an exception under a proposed new annual charity yard sale policy. And require any future sales to undergo a formal but expedited approval process. All in favor? Mr. Chan hesitated, but then raised his hand. 2 others joined, plus Ms. Rosen. Marjorie alone voted no. The count was 4-1. Relief coursed through me so intensely that tears pricked my eyes. Ms. Rosen banged her gavel gently. The motion passes. Violation overturned, no fines owed, and we'll draft a new policy for future charity events. Thank you all for attending. The room erupted in quiet cheers. Marjorie looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. People surrounded me, offering hugs, pats on the back, and congratulations. Adam Porter caught my eye, giving me a reassuring smile. It was over. I was free of the fine, and better yet, we'd set a precedent that might help charitable events thrive here. As the meeting concluded, Marjorie stormed out, refusing to speak with anyone. Ms. Rosen lingered, shaking my hand and apologizing for the stress. You did great, she said softly. And if you have future ideas for community charity events, let's talk early to avoid such conflict. Stepping outside, the tension in my shoulders dissipated. Tiana gave me a jubilant hug, tears of joy in her eyes. Mr. Lawson gripped my hand, smiling. I've never been prouder to live here, he said. Sometimes it takes a stand to remind us we're a community, not a dictatorship. Adam approached, offering a warm handshake. Well done. This was a real testament to civic engagement on a micro level. You stuck to your convictions, the neighbors rallied, and ultimately, the system worked, albeit with some friction. He chuckled. I can't wait to see how a formal charity yard sale policy shapes up. Feeling giddy, I realized we'd not only raised money for Oakwood Women's Shelter, but also advanced a new, more collaborative spirit in Riverwood Crest. Indeed, the local news blogger quickly posted an update titled, HOA Backs Down, Charity Yard Sale Triumphs. Readers cheered the outcome, praising the board's willingness to compromise. The next day, I visited Oakwood Women's Shelter to deliver the $1,100 we'd raised. The executive director's eyes shone with gratitude. This will go a long way, she said. Thank you, and your neighborhood for caring. That moment filled me with a sense of accomplishment. The stress, the confrontation, the looming threat of fines, all seemed worth it for that moment of heartfelt appreciation. In the ensuing weeks, life returned to normal. I resumed my freelance work and enjoyed quiet evenings on my porch. But I also noticed a subtle shift in the neighborhood. People who never spoke to each other before were exchanging smiles, forging deeper connections spurred by the yard sale fiasco. If I walked my dog around the block, I'd hear a neighbor mention the crazy yard sale that changed everything in a joking, affectionate tone. Marjorie, meanwhile, kept a low profile. Some said she was furious about losing face at the hearing. Others whispered she might step down from the board, though that never happened. She remained, albeit with diminished fervor. On rare occasions, I'd see her pass by my house, her posture stiff, and we'd trade curt nods. A fragile détente, perhaps, but it beat open warfare. About a month after the yard sale, a card arrived in my mailbox, addressed in elegant cursive. I opened it to find an invitation from Ms. Rosen, the HOA president, requesting my presence at the next board meeting to discuss the newly drafted annual community charity sale policy. Surprised yet pleased, I agreed to attend. That meeting was far less tense than the hearing. Ms. Rosen, Mr. Chan, and the other board members apologized for the stress caused by the old guidelines. They proposed that once a year, residents could hold a large yard sale event, either individually or collectively, with net proceeds benefiting a nonprofit. The board would oversee scheduling to ensure minimal conflict with other neighborhood activities. The policy would clarify signage rules, trash disposal, and timeframes, but the essence allowed philanthropic yard sales without fear of reprisal. As I read the draft policy, I felt a flood of validation. We did it. By challenging Marjorie's attempt to muzzle community spirit, we pushed the HOA to adopt a more open-minded stance. Even Marjorie attended the meeting, albeit quietly, occasionally rolling her eyes. She voted against the measure, of course, but the rest of the board voted in favor, and the new policy passed. I left that night feeling proud, not just for me, but for every neighbor who wanted to do good without petty obstacles. In the months that followed, Riverwood Crest seemed friendlier, more vibrant. Small gatherings popped up more frequently. A bake sale for the local elementary school, a holiday toy drive in December, a potted plant swap in the spring. Though Marjorie still policed the usual infractions, like an unapproved fence color or a loud party after 10 p.m., she no longer held absolute sway over well-meaning community events. The next summer, Ms. Rosen and Adam Porter co-organized a Riverwood Crest charity weekend, inviting neighbors to set up mini-stalls for crafts, baked goods, and second-hand items, with a portion of proceeds going to various charities. I helped coordinate, recalling the organizational skills from my event planning background. The turnout was phenomenal, an entire weekend of shopping, music, kids playing, and money raised for half a dozen local nonprofits. Oakwood Women's Shelter joined in, setting up an information booth. They shared success stories of how last year's yard sale donation helped a mother and her children secure temporary housing. Hearing that story hammered home the impact a single day's event could have. As I wandered among the stalls, greeting old and new neighbors, I spotted Marjorie lurking at the periphery, arms crossed. She didn't appear thrilled, but at least she wasn't trying to shut us down. When our eyes met, she gave a curt nod, then turned away. Maybe that was the closest thing to a truce I'd get. Throughout that day, I couldn't help but think back to the initial confrontation with Marjorie, the icy threat in her voice, the official letter demanding I cease the sale. How far we come since then. A spark of defiance, supported by neighbors and validated by a single city council member, had ignited a sea change in how our community approached charity and collaboration. Late in the afternoon, as the charity weekend wound down, Tiana approached me with a glass of lemonade. We clinked cups like they were champagne flutes, giggling about how different the atmosphere felt compared to last year's tension-filled yard sale. Look at us, Tiana mused. We turned adversity into something better. Adam Porter strolled up with a broad grin. Attendance was fantastic today. The city might take note of Riverwood Crest as a model for how HOAs can balance property values with community engagement. I reflected on that. Who would have thought that a single yard sale for Oakwood Women's Shelter, once threatened by fines and hostility, would transform an entire neighborhood's approach to events? Yet, it had. By refusing to cave under Marjorie's demands, we'd exposed the pettiness of certain rules and rallied neighbors who believed in kindness over rigid bureaucracy. Standing there with Tiana and Adam, watching families load up their cars with new treasures, I felt that sense of warm belonging. Yes, our HOA still had rules, but we'd proven they weren't ironclad weapons to stifle generosity and goodwill. We'd shown that a determined community, united in purpose, can speak louder than a single misguided enforcer. The day ended with exhausted smiles, a heavier donation jar for local charities, and a renewed confidence that we could shape the place we called home. Listen closely. If you ever find yourself facing a self-appointed neighborhood tyrant who claims rules are rules, remember the Riverwood Crest story. A quiet stand, bolstered by supportive neighbors and a bit of official backing, can spark a wave of positive change, one that even the most obstinate adversary cannot ignore. That victory isn't just about beating an unfair fine. It's about reclaiming the heart of a community for causes that truly matter.